Hello everybody! So you probably don't need me to tell you that the Toyota RAV4 is the most popular SUV in America. And that's why when a new version comes out, it is a huge deal. Well, right here is that new 2026 version. And this comes standard with a hybrid powertrain with some very impressive fuel economy figures. This one is 42 miles per gallon combined. But we all know that in the real world, sometimes it doesn't match up to the EPA estimates. So today we're going to be putting it to the test. And we want to know, when the rubber meets the road, does it live up to the expectations? Let's go ahead and find out. Now, before we go over to the gas station and fill it up and officially begin the test, I wanted to just kind of tell you guys some basic specifications about this RAV4 you're looking at today. This is the all-new 2026 RAV4, as I was saying. It's got Toyota's new 5th-gen hybrid system as standard equipment, which is a 2.5-liter 4-cylinder engine with your hybrid electric componentry and 236 horsepower. Now this one, like I said, is rated at 42 miles per gallon combined, 45 in the city and 39 on the highway. So very impressive figures. Those are quite a bit above even the hybrid competition that this model has, which is part of why we want to test it out, see if it actually lives up to that elevated standard over the competition. Now this also has a 14.5 gallon fuel tank, so pretty substantial for a hybrid model with that type of fuel economy, and that gives you over 600 miles of range, which is very impressive. Now today we'll be driving to Nashville and back, which will be using up the majority of that range. And we're not going to be hypermiling this vehicle, but along the way we will give you guys some tips about how you can maximize your fuel economy, especially if you're driving one of these new Toyota hybrids. Let's go ahead and get to the gas station. Now I'm going to go ahead and fill it up, but I want to point out before we get started here, we won't be just taking the car's word for it. We, of course, will be doing our own calculations and manually verifying how much fuel this vehicle has used by filling up again at the end of the test and just manually calculating those gallons.
Alrighty, so we have filled up the RAV4 with regular fuel to the first click on the fuel pump, and we are ready to begin our roughly 436-mile round trip to and from Nashville, Tennessee. So Drew and I are heading down there. We are road tripping for a media drive, and we're excited to put this RAV4 to the test and see if it truly lives up to that EPA rating.
Now, of course, as always, we're going to have a few rules we're going to follow. So first of all, we are going to be following the speed limit. That's an important part in getting the best fuel economy. And of course, you know, that's what illegally you should be doing, right?
Yes.
We're also going to use the normal drive mode in this vehicle, and we're going to keep the climate control at 72 degrees.
Now, if you're accustomed to our fuel economy test, we will be going through some checkpoints throughout this drive and letting you guys know what the car is telling us so far. And then, of course, at the end, we don't want to just trust the car. We're going to do our own manual calculation to see if it's meeting that true EPA rating. Also, we will be giving you guys some tips throughout our drive as well to help you maximize your fuel economy for your trips.
One of those tips I can really get into right now, because we're on our way to the highway. Most of this journey will be on the highway, but we got a little bit of kind of urban and rural driving on the way there. And that's really a good point to talk about when it comes to hybrid systems, because this vehicle has regen braking. So what that does is basically it's trying to recapture energy that would normally be lost in the braking just to heat in the brake pads. So a good way to actually maximize your efficiency and your fuel economy is when you're coming up to a stop, like a stop sign, let off early and let the car kind of naturally regen back down to speed. The less you're using the brakes, that's going to be the better, because that energy is being recaptured into the battery, and that's going to keep your engine off for longer later on in your journey, so that when you're driving, say 45 miles an hour like we are now, the engine is completely off and we're using no fuel.
If you're new here, we're brothers, and we've been reviewing cars since we were 12
and 16. We started young, and since then we've reviewed over 2,000 cars at every price point.
No matter what you're looking for, from our long-term vehicle videos to our side-by-side comparisons, we'd love for you to subscribe to be a part of our Car Confections family.
Let's learn a lot and have some fun with all the latest cars.
All right, guys, we are a quarter of the way through our journey, and we have traveled about 98 miles on our trip so far. So what is that initial fuel economy? I'll have Drew scroll over to it, and I will grab a picture. Drum roll, please. We are sitting at 42.6 MPG. That's what the car is reading so far on this trip, and compared to the 39 MPG highway fuel economy rating, we are currently outperforming that number and are actually sitting right on par with the combined EPA estimate. So that is quite an impressive rating so far.
Yeah, for sure. When we tested the Camry, which also had the hybrid system, it was doing about the same. So I'm actually kind of surprised that at least so far here with our first check-in that the RAV4 is doing just as well as our front-wheel drive Camry that we had previously. So that's certainly very good. Now, one of the reasons why it took me a second to get to the fuel economy was because this vehicle, since we have the XLE Premium, we don't have the full driving assistance package. That means you do have to shake the steering wheel. So before I could start scrolling, I had to get rid of the message that said, "Take control." It tells you that a lot in this vehicle, just like with the Camry. This is kind of, one of the first longer road trips that we've taken with this RAV4, so I wanted to point that out. It's also time for the next tip that will help increase your fuel economy. Now, with a hybrid, including this RAV4, things like your climate control are going to be powered through the battery system. So one of the things that you can do is utilize more of your things such as your heated seats, excuse me, which will be more efficient than having your climate control running a lot. So if you are, in a situation where you're on the edge and you don't really need that climate control on, turn that off, because that is going to be able to keep more energy in your battery. And again, the more energy in your battery, the less that engine is going to be running.
All right, it is time for our halfway check-in point. So we have driven about 169 miles now of our road trip, and it is time to see what our car-rated fuel economy is sitting at. And I think you guys are going to be impressed.
All right, here it comes. There we go.
Very nice.
43.2 miles per gallon.
Yep, I got that picture to record it, and that is pretty impressive. We have continued to improve as we have gone down the highway here. We're just outside of Nashville, Tennessee, and I'm still really impressed with the performance. It seems like the engine is still willingly shutting off. We've gone, up and down some hills, been a little bit of the undulation in the terrain, and it's continued to perform really well.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm super impressed by this. Of course, we'll manually calculate it later, but
yes,
what the car is saying is really impressive. That's kind of matching as well with the fuel range prediction, and it's really good stuff. To have a compact crossover getting that type of fuel economy in an interstate situation is really impressive. Now, Josh mentioned a little bit about going up and down hills and how that impacts the hybrid system, and that is something I kind of wanted to mention about the hybrid system operation in general. Toyota, we've driven all of their different, models with their hybrid system, and they really do a great job of, I think, tuning it for how people usually drive. So it's not a hybrid system that you have to adapt to a ton, because we have found in our testing, we did some hypermiling with our Camry that also has the 5th gen hybrid system, and we found that it performed actually better when you accelerate with decent amount of haste, and then you kind of, when you get up to that cruising speed, let off. That allows the engine to shut off. And I think, when you're using it in that type of situation, which is typically what people drive like anyways, accelerating from a stoplight or a stop sign, stuff like that, you get up to that operating speed and then it gets the engine off as soon as possible. It actually makes it easier to deal with than, say, a different type of hybrid system, which would require you kind of ease onto it and then try to keep the engine off as long as possible. I think Toyota's method has proven really to be more efficient than what a lot of the rivals are doing.
Yeah, this car is ridiculously easy to learn how to drive if you're coming from like a fully ICE product. It's really nice to kind of get into this hybrid, and the hybrid system adapts to you and how you would normally drive, whereas some hybrids do have a little bit of a learning curve. And speaking of our Camry that we previously owned and did that hypermiling test in, we kind of want to talk about just a couple of quick impressions, because this is really our first longer road trip that we've done in the RAV4, and we have definitely learned a few things on the way down to Nashville today. Drew, you want to kick us off?
Yeah, for sure. Like, we took the Camry on this exact route numerous times. One of the biggies for both of us that we've seen today and felt today is that our butts aren't nearly as numb. These seats are much improved over our Camry. They're not the most comfortable seats in the entire world, but they definitely have a lot more support, a lot more cush to them as well, and it feels like the miles are just going by better. Previously, we were like, oh, by the time we got down here to the Nashville area, your lower back's hurting, stuff like that. Not having any of that happen today.
Yeah, I definitely think it is an improvement, as well as just having better overall ride quality. Of course, we do have smaller wheels than our XSE Camry had, but overall, the general increased comfort that you get from this new RAV4 makes having to wiggle the steering wheel with the cruise control a little less annoying overall.
Yeah, that of course is an annoyance. I already mentioned that. I do wish Toyota would, change the setup, but as it stands, they make you pay for a higher end package if you want the, driver monitoring camera, which in that case does a much better job at keeping track of you without you having to wiggle the camera.
Yep, so that is it with our second check-in. We will be hitting the road here very soon to head back home to Kentucky for our second half of this test, and we're very excited to share with you that final manual calculation. All right, so we are back for our third check-in, about 75% of our way through our journey, around 265 miles at this point, and it is time to see what the car rating is for our journey so far. So drum roll, everybody, as Drew gets ready to unveil it. We are sitting at 44 MPG, so we keep on going up according to what the car is reading. That is, again, still really impressive. Yeah, so 44 MPG is still above that EPA rating of 42 MPG combined. So that makes me really curious to see what our manual calculation is at our final checkpoint.
And it's time for another tip. Well, this tip is drive the speed limit. Sounds kind of dumb, but when you actually do the math, it is really impressive the results that you can get from driving the speed limit versus speeding even just a little bit. Actually, according to the EPA, you lose 1 to 2% of efficiency every mile per hour you go above 55. So that's quite incredible. That means if you go 80 instead of 55, that would be 30% more fuel consumed.
Yeah, easier said than done at the end of the day, though. So you have to modulate whether or not you want that lead foot.
Well, we're back where we started. We need one last check-in with what the car says before we get that manual calculation.
Yep, and after our 433 mile round trip, the car is reading 43 MPG. So we are excited to go do our manual calculations. So let's do our final fill up. So now it's time to do a little bit of simple math to figure out the actual estimated MPG that we did for this road trip. So with our 433 mile round trip divided by the 9.939 gallons we just filled up with for this final fill up, we are getting the overall result of 43.6 MPG for that entire trip. And that means it does officially beat that EPA estimate.
Yeah, that is really impressive. That's actually more than the combined fuel economy rating, city and highway, and we did the vast majority of this on the highway. We did hit, a little bit of traffic, and there's a little bit of lower speed stuff, but it was the vast majority on the highway, which just, I think, is all the more impressive because, of course, hybrids really usually do the best when they're in the context of a city. But the highway, to deliver this type of fuel economy, that really is incredible. And, I mean, you certainly probably don't want to drive 600 miles without stopping, but that's something you can do with this RAV4 hybrid.
Yeah, and I think it's also just impressive that it kind of helps us understand how the car calculating does now, and it actually is pretty in line with what the car was telling us as well. So at least in this RAV4, it can differ between different models, but for our RAV4, it'll be pretty easy to trust it from here on out.
Now, of course, we own this 2026 RAV4, so if you're interested in this model, make sure you're subscribed to our channel. We've already done quite a bit of content with it, and we will continue to be doing lots of content as we own this vehicle and go through that entire ownership experience. If you're also interested in buying a RAV4 or any new vehicle, go to carconfections.com/newcarquotes. That's where you can get access to the best price and invoice pricing information, which is great for dealership negotiation. There'll be a link provided below in the video description, as well as a pinned comment at the top of this video. If you're already a fan and subscriber, we thank you for your continued support, and we'll catch you next time as we sample more of the latest automotive delicacies.